I'm Eric Stewart from Widow Care, and welcome to Widow Care Talks. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dalveer Kaur, who is from New York City, and Dalveer is a widow who is going to share a little bit about her story today. Dalveer, at our Widow Care speaker series in April, you shared about what it was like for you as a young widow. Would you mind sharing with our audience what your experience was as being a young widow, losing your husband, Hargobind, and how you were able to walk through that?
So being a young widow, it's very difficult. I don't think that you ever find your place in life. And I remember one of my closest friends said to me, "It's like being in a place of purgatory." And really, there's no best analogy than that, because I'm still married. There's no separation, there's no divorce, he's just not here. And when my husband passed away, it was 3 months after my 35th birthday. And I just remember thinking, okay, I have to do the funeral, we have to get his body embalmed, who's going to pay, how am I going to pay for this? And it was just it was nothing like you would think it is in the movies. Like, people watch Ghost and they think, oh, it's going to be so romantic and you're going to cry over the body. But actually, I just stood there and I was like, why is the undertaker late? When do I go and pay for the funeral? How do I know which casket to choose? And I just stood there in complete shock every day for, I think, a month. And then it hit, and 10 days later, I returned to work. And it was just, you are still on autopilot because the shock is just so real. And then something inside you breaks, and you're like, shit, he's not here. And at 35, most people are still beginning their life. They're still in the honeymoon phase. And I feel like I was robbed of that. He got brain cancer a year and a half into our marriage, and we never got the honeymoon phase. So I always feel so sad and I always feel like there was so much of my marriage that I didn't get to live. We were supposed to grow old together. We were supposed to live our youth together. And instead we went from being married to him dying. And nobody grew old, And so being a young widow, I just feel that, and it's a good thing there aren't many young widows, but I feel like I cannot relate with my peers a lot of the time. And also there's so many unfinished dreams. We didn't even get to plan for a family. Because he was so young, we didn't have life insurance because you think you don't need life insurance. And now I look at my peers and my friends, and they're having babies or they're getting married, and I'm still grieving. And it's a challenging experience because it's not. I used to say to my friends, I'm going to be a widow before I turn 40, and I did. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what it's like.
The surprise of losing all of the dreams and the suffering that you've gone through has probably been just a day-to-day process. How have you been able to walk that through day by day? What kind of resources have you found?
So when I first started out, I was actually really angry, and this is horrible to confess, but very true, but I almost punched my sister in the face. I was so angry one day. I just was so angry, and I just didn't want to be around people. And she was so concerned, but I didn't see that. So my way of dealing with her concern was to just be like, I just wanted to punch her. I really did. And after that, she was like, I don't care. You are going to have therapy. And that's when I started having therapy. And it was after a really dark place. Like, I didn't want to live because there was no point in my existence. And I went to a grief counselor who that my insurance didn't cover. And he was a specialized grief counselor. And I spent a year with him trying to just figure out why this happened to me. And there were days when I just cried. There were days when I didn't want to be part of the world. And I read a book recently about how to write hard stories, and there's a piece in there that says, it's not that I don't want to live, it's that I'm not in love with living. And I think that's how I feel, but my support from my family, the support from my friends, the support from my faith, and just getting up in the morning sometimes is what has gotten me through so far. And getting up and going to work is the hardest part, because after a while nobody wants to hear about your grief, nobody wants to see you cry, nobody cares anymore. And it's a horrible thing to say, but you have to just own it, because it's your grief. Just because you care doesn't mean everybody's going to care. And so, it is a very classic and cliche saying, but you have to fake it until you make it. And every day I fake it until I'll make it. And, sometimes I still want to punch my sister in the face, it's not nice, but, I just feel so frustrated that I don't know what else to do. And I'm like, damn it, why me? But, it's hard. And I feel like my therapist and my support system has really kept me going. And that includes allowing me to have days when I didn't want to go on, and allowing me to stay in bed, and allowing me to cut off from the world. And those days will never stop. So that's how I get through it. I wouldn't recommend punching your sister, though.
I think in a culture which prizes always trying to have a good time, and always trying to find joy in everything, and laughter, humor, that the reality of life is that a lot of life is painful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think many don't necessarily see the kind of pain that you've been suffering through, mm-hmm. but everyone can relate to pain, because mm-hmm. we all face it. We all struggle getting up at certain days of the week, certain times, plowing through and making it through. And you're sharing this is so real, and I think it's the reality of what you're facing that is encouraging to others. And I know that there are widows and widowers watching now who relate very clearly, except for maybe punching their sister in the face.
Yeah, we don't recommend it.
So you're now in New York City. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do or work?
I work for the New York City Department of Health on the opioid epidemic. And although my work is based on a countrywide epidemic, my passion comes from what I witnessed as the carer of my husband for 2.5 years. That when people pass from a drug overdose or are trying to get access to care because they have a substance use challenge, that shouldn't be hard. It shouldn't be difficult for families. We should be providing places that are supporting and that are stigma-free. And for me, that comes from my personal experience. When we lose family, that pain is indescribable. And I have spoken to so many family members that have lost loved ones, and they will always say, but I could have intervened. And I think that's what breaks my heart about the work that I do right now. But I always come from a place that, what can we do to support the survivors? What can we do to put in place a system that continues to heal our communities, because that's one thing that we need a lot more of, and that's why I wish widow care existed in New York City, because when I found out about widow care, it was like a light at the end of the tunnel, because you talked about my experience, and my experience didn't isolate me. And that for me was, for the first time, I didn't feel alone, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important.
We appreciate that you are part of a community and that you are open to sharing your story with the community. And I think there are many people in New York City who are very blessed to have you there to bring that intervention, that acceptance, non-judgmental encouragement to come alongside families that have suffered, and you can relate to that through your own grief. And I'm just grateful for that, and I'm glad that you could be with us here at Widow Care and share your story at our Widow Care Speaker Series. Thank you. Dalveer, I don't know what the cost of grief has been for you. What would you estimate that to be?
So for me, the cost of grief is I actually had to, 6 months after my husband passed away, I had to change my job so that I could earn more to cover the cost of my grief. And even with a substantial increase in salary, I still struggle. My grief therapy alone is $175 a session.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was losing the will to live, I was having therapy 2-3 times a week. And that was more than the cost of my monthly outgoings. And as my grief grew, my health deteriorated, and today I have several health conditions as a result of that. And I'm always in and out of doctor's appointments, and I have those co-pays. And then I remember when my husband passed away, all government support that we had, it was cut off from that day. And immediately I lost everything. I lost any additional income that was coming my way. But I went and I sat at the funeral home, and I remember, although the funeral home was really sympathetic and it was their job, you know, he very matter-of-factly said to me, "So how do you plan on paying for this?" And the funeral cost $10,000. And it wasn't even a lavish funeral. It was a cremation.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very simple cremation with just my family. And I thought to myself, how am I going to do this? And my husband had a terminal cancer that needed really intensive treatment. And the treatment alone, each session co-pay was $1,000. And even with support from foundations, we struggled. And to this day, I get letters from the hospital asking for those payments. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, when you're young, you don't get life insurance because you think you're married and you think you have a life ahead of you, but you know, you never anticipate that you don't. And so we didn't have life insurance. And when my friends or my colleagues said, "Well, what about your life insurance?" I was like, "What life insurance? There's no life insurance. There's just me. I'm the existence of him." So that's one thing about the cost of grief that I think that, you know, really doesn't account. It's disabling. It's all incorporating. It's overwhelming, and there's no support for it. You know, I believe that the state pays $250 towards a funeral. A casket does not cost $250. And, you know, I'm not entitled to a widower's pension because I'm not 65. Hopefully at 65 I wouldn't need a widower's pension, you know? But those are the things that hurt me, because apparently when I became a widow, Facebook knew before I did, and it told me to join a group. And I read all these stories in the first week of my husband passing away of how these women were selling their homes. And it was just heartbreaking. And I don't think that anybody should have to suffer a loss time and time and time again. You know, it seems really unfair. So this is something that I feel really passionate about. That, you know, where, like, people say you're strong, but where are you allowed to stop being strong? Like, what you know, the cost of being strong is tremendous to us. So for me, the cost of grief is emotional, it's physical, but it's financial as well. It's all incorporating. So
It seems like the financial cost, if it's not easy to make that financial payment for your grief, that just compounds emotional grief on top of that. And then feeling of shame, potentially,
right,
feeling guilty, feeling all kinds of feelings, and having then to work through that.
right.
Did you experience that?
Yeah, because there were days when, for instance, I was at a point where my therapist and my psychiatrist wanted to hospitalize me because it was just so sad. And I remember thinking, I'm not mad. I'm sad. Like, you know, if you hospitalize me, I'm not going to stop feeling the loss of my husband.
Right.
And it was that. So whether or not I could afford to go to my therapist at that moment seemed to outweigh the fact that I didn't want to be hospitalized, because there was this emotional burden on me that I had to show the world that I was still functioning. So
The sadness is overwhelming and paralyzing.
Yeah.
And then you still have life to keep going with. You still have to keep moving on. And I think that divorced couples probably feel the same way as they're trying to work through their life, but you don't have the ability to communicate with your partner. You don't have even to work things through. You don't have the capability. And so on your own, or with the help of your sister and your family, and then through the kindness of foundations that have been willing to provide, you've been able to get to this point in time. But it sounds like it's been a very hard struggle for you. If you could give a piece of encouragement to other widows now of something to look forward to, or even to consider, what would you direct them to?
I think what I would say really is that it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel your grief. And it's okay to just cry. I went to my therapist yesterday and I said, I'm so tired. I just want to be sad today. And she said to me, be sad. And I sat there and I cried. And there wasn't a judgment around it. And don't let anybody tell you that there are stages of grief. There's no stage. It's your loss. You get to determine what stage you are at. And if you're angry, you're sad, you're happy, they're all okay. And you have to be the person that heals first. You can't focus on other people. And I would really, really echo that you have to put yourself first.
Thank you, Dalveer.
Thank you.
Dalveer Kaur has been our guest here at Widow Care Talks. We're so grateful for she and her family who've come down from New York City to join us and share her story. You can find more Widow Care Talks at widowcare.org.